You know, the one thing that has pissed me off the most about these riots that have happened, one thing that has pissed me off more than knowing that businesses have been looted, one thing that's pissed me off more than knowing that innocent people have been killed during these riots, and what's pissed me off even more than knowing that an innocent black man has died at the hands of the police is the fact that within the last 28 years, yes, it has been 28 years since the Rodney King riots, no one has yet figured out how to prevent these riots from starting in the first place. Every time after a riot happens, the first thing people do, and this is especially true with people in Hollywood and people from CNN, both black and white, they like to get up and say, we just need to call out racism, and that's all we need to do. We need to acknowledge our white privilege. And then they pat themselves on the back for it. And yet they haven't realized that within the last 28 years, we have seen little to no progress after doing this. These people keep saying that we need to be understanding about why these riots are happening. They say we just need to let these people express their rage, even though we are seeing both black and white people rioting on the streets. It is these people who will say that stores and merchandise are replaceable and that black lives are not. Well, you know, it's easy for them to keep saying that until they finally begin to realize that there are people who are in fact dying in this riot. And ironically enough, mostly black.
Arrested today. 4 people were shot. 2 of them have died. Not exactly sure about the relationship. Were they outsiders or are they local residents here? That said, as we speak, 100 Cicero police officers are on patrol, supplemented by 120, a combination of Cook County Sheriff's deputies and Illinois State Police troopers. A CPD chopper has been circling overhead as well. That and local men, some of them armed with guns, bats, golf clubs, walking around patrolling themselves, making it known that they are here to defend their turf.
The problem is that the mainstream media and Hollywood, and quite frankly most of the internet, has been ignoring the vast majority of cases which involve both police brutality and racial violence. When I say racial violence, I'm not just talking about with the police, I'm talking about with American citizens in general. They have been very picky and choosy with which stories make the headlines. They always like to specifically pick out the stories which involve black people being killed by the police. And keep in mind, I'm not trying to justify what the police are doing, but realistically, you have more white people who are dying every year at the hands of police brutality than you do black people.
That's what that total looks like when sorted by race and ethnicity. But look what happens when we make these numbers reflective of the US population. This overrepresentation of black Americans becomes even more stark when we look at the details of police deaths. For example, of the 545 people killed by police this year, 119, or nearly 22%, have been completely unarmed. Let's see that broken down into per capita rates. Black Americans and Hispanic and Latinos have also been disproportionately represented among the 211 people shot and killed by police while not having a gun.
And yes, I do understand that statistically, police brutality is more of a problem for black people than it is for whites. Sometimes it changes. Sometimes the average black person is 2 times more likely to be killed. Sometimes the average black person is 3 times more likely to be killed. But what's troublesome is that the mainstream media and Hollywood are not telling black people that the vast majority of people who get killed by the police, black, white, brown, most of them are being killed because they are resisting arrest. And yes, I do believe that all these cops should be held accountable for what they do, even if the person that they kill is being somewhat violent. I am not trying to justify anything here. But the problem is that they have deliberately picked out the stories in which only black people are being killed to make it sound as if this is specifically a black problem. And unfortunately, this is just getting the average African American, I'm not trying to generalize anybody here, but this is getting the average African American to think that this is solely a black problem. And that is when we get these race riots happening. Now, I'm not saying that in the case with George Floyd that he was being violent towards the cop, but notice how Whenever there's a major race riot happening, that is almost always when a black person is killed. You never see a major race riot whenever it's a white person, a Hispanic person, or in some very rare cases, when an Asian person gets killed. Now, was that a giant coincidence? Or is it because of how both Hollywood and the mainstream media have been portraying police brutality and racial violence? This is because to the mainstream media, stories about police brutality and racism is nothing more than a political tool to them. It's how they get people to vote. And that is it. And notice how the mainstream media, if they really care so much about racism and interracial violence, then why are they ignoring all other forms of racial violence? And I'm not talking about police brutality as of now. Right now, I'm talking about black on white, white on black, brown on black. Yes, they completely ignore interracial violence outside of police brutality, even though there are more cases where you have black individuals murdering people outside of their race. The media really wanted for whites, blacks, Hispanics, Asians to be able to unite together much better. Then you know what? They would be shining light on all these stories about police brutality and other forms of interracial violence. But because all they care about is using this kind of stuff as a political tool, they're not going to talk about it. Let me just say that I hear a lot of black people and a lot of white liberals saying that if you do not learn from the past, then you are doomed to repeat it. Yeah, well, you know what? Obviously not too many black people or liberals have realized that they haven't learned within the last 28 years. I mean, for crying out loud, we're not talking about something that happened 100 to 200 years ago. We're talking about something that most people as of today have witnessed when they were alive. I do not see too many black people going by that saying of, you have to learn from the past. Another interesting saying that I see a lot of black people avoiding as of now is, two wrongs doesn't make a right. And yet for some reason it's okay to riot when an innocent black person dies at the hands of some white cops. And also, it's more than safe to say that all these people who are rioting aren't just doing it because of anger. They're not doing it for justice. Because if they were, you'd think they'd be taking all the money they steal and give it to the family of George Floyd.